So welcome
Perfect.
everybody to our webinar about motivation and motion. We have Kristy Robinson and Rachael Diamant here to talk about motivation with teens and helping them find their drive. You're in for a real treat, and I'm gonna pass this off to Rachael and Kristy.
Thanks, Nadine. So I'm Rachel. I was mentioning to Susan earlier that I wear a few hats. I'm a learning specialist, so I work in academic support with teens every day, and have done so for a number of years now. I am also a graduate student at McGill. I'm in my first year of my doctorate, working with Kristy Robinson, who's my supervisor in PhD in education in learning sciences, specifically the field of motivation. So it's a nice sort of dual perspective that I'm hoping to bring. And I will let Kristy introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Kristy. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology at McGill. I'm so happy to be here. So happy to be here with you all, and just to really elevate Rachel and the amazing work that she already is doing as a doctoral student at McGill. I feel very lucky that I get to work with her. So I am a professor, and I study how and why people become and stay motivated. That's my whole thing, especially how teachers can motivate their students, but I'm also interested in parents and the role that just basically influential others can play in students' lives. And I will also say, as a separate kind of cred, I'm the mother of four. One who was recently a teen, two who are currently teens, and one who is a tween. So I bring that lens, if not that expertise, as well to this conversation. Thanks.
Perfect. So starting us off here. So we'll take you through it a little bit. First is going to be sort of breaking down teenagehood as through the lens of motivation. It's a wonderful time of transition and change and growth, and that has huge impacts in so many areas of their lives, but especially in motivation. So we'll spend a little bit of time speaking about that. I'm also going to share some insights from some of my research work that I work with teens. It's all about student voice and sharing their perspectives and what they're noticing. So we'll bring that as well to get that sort of student perspective. And as much as we can, we're going to help give you some tips and tricks and strategies and perspectives to take away for the teens in your life that you support, and as much as possible, also make that collaborative. So we will leave some time at the end to answer any questions. If you have any particular situations that you want to bring up that you'd like some advice on, maybe we can help out. I'm sure you are not the only person in the room who is maybe experiencing some of those challenging moments with teens or opportunities. So we'll have a chance to have hopefully a good discussion on that as well. So to start us off, like I said, teenagehood is a huge time of growth and transition and change in so many aspects of their lives. And there can be a tendency to think of teens as sometimes disconnected or demotivated, or I don't know if you've ever had a teenager roll their eyes at you. I have. And it's sometimes, you can sometimes find yourself sitting in that mindset of, how do I get this teen to engage in what I'm hoping they'll engage with? And what we're going to try and focus on is sort of reshifting that mindset and taking a different perspective when we're looking at our teens. So let's set the scene a little bit. Like I said, we are hoping to look at, share what we're noticing and using sort of real examples of what we see in our day-to-day lives, what we see in our work, to hopefully give some context here. And some of those things are inconsistency. So I've had teens come, one day to the next. Sometimes they're all in, they're super engaged. They'll tell me they're locked in. And then the next day, not so much, or there's a shift as well. And sometimes there's a procrastination tendency, especially around starting tasks. It's a big area of work that I do, is helping students to start tasks that they're, for one reason or another, avoiding. There's a shift in engagement, and this can happen day to day, but also over this time generally. They are shifting their priorities, they're shifting their interests as they sort of develop their identities, their communities. And so we can see, like I said, areas where there is a ton of interest or periods of that time, and sometimes less engagement. If they're being asked to clean their room, perhaps, or something else. And like I said, it can feel a little bit all or nothing. I tell my students all the time, motivated students will move mountains, and they truly can, and they can accomplish huge things when they're all in. And sometimes that's just not the version of them that we get that day. And sometimes that's not the thing that they're interested in doing or motivated to do. So, and in high school, especially, it's a lot of additional circumstance that adds to that. So the stakes are higher. Teens are starting to feel that pressure of academics, of grades, of life choices. Suddenly they're being asked things like, well, what do you want to do in CEGEP and in university? And maybe those are things they had not considered. And there's more pressure from an academic lens in high school. And they're expected to manage more, right? They've got more classes, they've got responsibilities, there's responsibilities at home that add to that. But they still lack a lot of that autonomy of adulthood. They don't have control over what classes they're in or their teachers or what homework gets assigned. It's sort of handed to them and they're expected to carry that and move forward with it. And the motivation as priorities develop, right? We said they're developing their identity, they're developing their interests, and they're saying, well, I want to do this. I'm passionate about this. And that's sort of drawing their attention and their motivation. And it's becoming more selective and shifting potentially from their areas of interest as younger children. And it creates this tension of external expectations from school, from parents, from the adults in their life, grandparents potentially as well, where there's this expectation that they're going to have more responsibility and take on more and complete more and self-manage more. At the same time, they're building their own internal goals, and those two things can sometimes be conflicting and often are conflicting. So I'm going to pass it off to Kristy here to take it away a little bit when we talk about motivation. What do you really need?
Rachel's done such a great job setting the scene. Yeah, this is a time of a lot of change, right? The teens have their bodies changing, their brains are changing, their abilities are changing, and their needs are changing. And they also are typically changing context from primary to secondary. The needs and the context don't always perfectly align. So there's a lot of research on that transition from primary to secondary and how in some ways, it's good that they have more autonomy and they want more autonomy. In some ways, they're losing some of the supports that they've had that could still be helpful to them. So there's specifically motivationally, that can be a little disruptive at a really key time. So we keep using this word, motivation. What does that actually mean? We want to be really clear on terminology. We use this word a lot in life, right? Oh, I'm so motivated today. Oh, this is a very motivated student. Oh, I feel so unmotivated, whatever it is. The way that we use that word day to day, especially just in regular life, can suggest it's something that we either have or we don't have, right? Or that it's something that's a stable trait of each person, right? Like this is a highly motivated student, or this is a highly unmotivated student, or this is a math person or not a math person, right? In reality, motivation is not only malleable, changing from moment to moment and day to day, it's made up of lots of different beliefs that together initiate and sustain goal-directed behavior. So motivation is what initiates and sustains our goal-directed behavior, right? It's what we need to really put in a lot of effort to keep exerting effort when things get difficult. And it is based on, well, before I say that, I do want to say, so in order for our students to choose a task and to put a little effort or a lot of effort into that task and to keep going on that task when things get hard, students need motivation. And that means they need to have sort of an array of beliefs that it can be kind of like tools they can choose from. So motivation is based on individuals' beliefs about, can I do this? And why do I want to do this? In order to choose that task, to put in a lot of effort and to keep going, students need to feel it's both possible and that they have good reasons for doing it. And the most powerful motivation comes from the combination of the two being in place. Now, people can have better or worse reasons for doing things, higher or lower quality reasons, and we can talk about that a little bit on the next slide. Yeah, so under the can I do this sort of category of motivational beliefs, we have a few things. The most important one being people's beliefs about, am I competent or not? Do I feel confident that I have the skills and I know the path to having success on this task? So competence beliefs and confidence, they can go a long way. There's some other related beliefs though related to can I do this? One is effort beliefs and mindsets. So you might have heard about mindsets before, right? A growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Do I believe that my abilities can change with effort, or do I believe that my abilities are rather fixed and no matter how much work I put in, I'm never going to be better at this? A growth mindset is important because that helps us justify some effort and to realize that we can actually get better if we put in effort and use good strategies. Now, effort beliefs are related. It's what we believe about the role of effort, right? Does this task really just require me to be smart, and is it a test of my smartness or dumbness? Or is this something that I can succeed on as long as I put in the work and I use the strategies and I get the right kinds of help? Sometimes we don't even know that we endorse some of these either fixed mindsets or beliefs that brilliance is required instead of effort until we really examine how we've been acting. I know I can analyze my own behavior. You can probably look to your past behavior as a student and try to think, okay, was I really trying to put in the effort and strategies and really try to learn, or was I trying to avoid finding out that I wasn't good enough, right? Or good or not smart enough. So we have to feel confident. We have to believe that our effort will pay off. And related to can I do this, the third category here is about the environmental and contextual concerns. So environmental contextual concerns might be things like, do my parents and teachers actually believe in me, right? So is my own confidence going to and my own strategies and efforts, are they going to pay off, or am I going to be either discriminated against, or am I going to be thought less of? Another one could be, am I going to be able to have a quiet place to study, right? We can even think about structural things like food security, all those kinds of things, right? Do I have the tools I need, not only within my own mind, but also around me? And am I going to be able to get the support that I need? So those are the can I do this motivational beliefs. We have this other big bucket of motivational beliefs, which is the why do I want to do this beliefs. So we might have lots of reasons for doing something, right? The classic example that I use in my motivation class is about making the bed. I can really do a great job of generating low quality reasons for my kids to make the bed. If I say, make the bed or else you'll be punished, right? They will do that making the bed job, perhaps, as long as there's a punishment hanging over them. But as soon as they no longer have the threat of a punishment, they're probably not going to do it anymore, right? So what I want to do is try to give them better reasons, more high quality reasons to internalize the importance of making the bed and come to develop a reason of their own for why, their room is nice to have so clean. So first bullet point under why do I want to do this is the task values. So is this going to be useful to me? Can I find a way that this task will help me on my current goals or my future goals? We also have interest. That's a great one. If we already have interest in the task, if it's already all by itself going to be fun or interesting, then that's a great reason to be doing something. Anytime we can pair a little bit of fun with something that otherwise might be hard or like a drudgery, can really help us develop that interest actually over time. We also have achievement goals. So is my goal, my sort of orientation toward the task, is it about learning and mastering this task or learning and mastering this concept, growing my ability, growing my knowledge, or is it about performing, right? Is it about comparing favorably to others, avoiding looking bad in front of others? Those two don't necessarily have to be opposites of each other. We might have those two goals at the exact same time, but generally we want to have students oriented toward mastery, right? Like if they're there to learn and they're there to grow their abilities, a lot of other things are going to fall in place. And lastly, we have belonging and identity related reasons. Actually those personal connections to people, including nice rapport with the teacher, nice rapport with a parent, nice rapport with other students, can be really motivating reasons to do something, right? Either I'm a person who, right? Think about that. I'm a person who studies hard. I'm a person who does the work. I'm a person who's a reader, or I'm a person who's a science person or a math person. That can be a very powerful motivator. And belonging, I'm a person who belongs at this school, and at this school we do this, right? That's our school culture. Or I'm a person who, my friends all are working really hard around me, so it's going to be harder for me to fit in if I don't also adopt that norm. So students really may be motivated or demotivated by just one of these many beliefs, or it might be the combination of many of them together that really energizes them for a task, right? But kind of coming back to this point that They need to have something in the can I do this bucket and something in the why do I want to do this bucket to really get there on a task. So it can be helpful too if you kind of imagine in your own mind what's a recent, achievement that you just had or a task that you had to complete that might have been a little bit difficult. You might be able to think of some examples in your own life of, did you feel confident and how did that happen? Maybe you've done it before and so it was easy, or you've done it before, or you've seen someone else do it. So you had a little bit of confidence that you knew the path to success and you had some kind of compelling reason to do it, right? You can think about exercise examples or work examples, things like that. Can try to get in the mind of your own to try then map, what might be going on in a teen's mind, which won't be the exact same, of course, but knowing about the beliefs that can motivate or demotivate ourselves and our teens it can be very empowering, right? For trying to even just diagnose what's going on in a situation. When you see something's going on, you can start to think about, okay, well, let's first think, is this a confidence problem or is it a value problem, a reasons problem? Yeah. Now, I do have bad news, which is that the research shows these motivational beliefs tend to decline over time on average. Motivational loss is the norm or the trend for like groups or populations. We see this in the short term, like over a few weeks, and we do see this in the longer term across years of schooling, typically when we're asking about in relation to math or in relation to language arts, right? In general, the trend is decline. But there's also some good news to counterbalance this on our next slide here. What is the good news? Oh, that is motivation is not fixed. Definitely grows and changes over time. It's quite dynamic. It doesn't decline for every person either. Sometimes those trends we see of average motivational decline can be driven by a small subgroup of students who's found their passion somewhere else, for example. So another thing that is good news here is that teens' motivation is really shaped by their environment and experience. So motivational loss doesn't have to be the story for everyone, and teachers can intervene, parents can intervene, peers can intervene to help provide motivating experiences rather than assuming it's the job of the teen to always maintain their own motivation. And a really encouraging thing that I definitely want to convey is that small shifts in how the adults behave and communicate with the teens in their lives can make a really meaningful difference, even if it's only in a moment and you get to see a moment where they light up instead of shutting down. It's really rewarding to know some of the tools and to try out some of these tools. Indeed, our next bullet here tells us a truth, which is that parents and teachers really do play an important role in supporting motivation. Parents and teachers have a lot of control over the environment at home, at school, and they can set up structures and they can set up norms for communicating, and they can even, shift the tone in a particular conversation with a teen to make it more likely, let's say, that the teen will have a motivating experience rather than get their bubble popped, is the metaphor that I like to use. And lastly, kind of the lens we want to bring to this is that our goal isn't to control their motivation and make sure they're really motivated for the tasks that we value, but rather to support the development of their own motivation. Right? If we're doing our job as motivating adults really well, we want to make ourselves more and more redundant, right? We want to stay in their lives forever, ideally, but we want to do this by equipping teens with tools that they can use to keep themselves motivated throughout their lives. This can include skills to find and advocate for contexts that meet their needs. Right? To say, hey, adult in my life, this would be really helpful. My daughter would probably say, Mom, don't tell me to clean my room. I already wanted to do it, and now that you asked me to do it, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm on it, even if it's not on your timeline. Or we, of course, also can help teens develop the ways of thinking about tasks and about situations that can help them pull on that toolkit of multiple motivational beliefs that can bring them to, the kinds of behaviors and choices that they really value and want to cultivate for their lives.
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier, there can be a tension, right, between what we're hoping to instill in our students and our teens and maybe how it lands. And that's something that I experience regularly. And I think truly, if we're looking at how can we better support teens, there does have to be a sort of a critical lens that we look back at how we've maybe interacted in the past or something we intended to try that didn't land so well, and why that might be the case. So one example is adults often intend support, right? It's how can I help you with this? Make sure that they're getting their work done, making sure that the room is clean, making sure that, they're doing all these things that you want for them. But teens might interpret that as surveillance, right? You're overbearing or you're helicopter parenting or grandparenting and telling them all the things that they need to do for themselves. Like Kristy mentioned, I was going to do it until you told me, and now I'm not going to because you're too close and hovering too closely on what I'm in charge of. Secondly, accountability, right? We're saying, okay, make sure that your work gets done. I'm going to check to make sure that you did this. And your teacher is going to let me know how that test went to make sure that you did all the things that you need to do. Again, accountability can be fantastic, right? I think of the first one that comes to mind is exercise accountability, right? If you're working with a trainer or somebody who's there to help keep you on track, that can be a really motivating tool to help you meet the goals that you set for yourself. But again, it can sometimes come across as a lack of control, that I don't have control over what I'm doing. You're the one telling me what to do. And by trying to keep me accountable, you're taking away that autonomy, especially teens. And we'll get into this. That desire for autonomy and choice and ownership is all encompassing at times. It's very important to them, and it should be. It's important. So, like I said, best intentions maybe doesn't land the way we hope it does. And similarly, high standards, right? We talk about that from a teacher's perspective a lot, to parents as well, that it's important to set high standards to help your teens see that they can achieve great things, right? And we don't want to lower our standards and have that become a pattern. So it's, maintaining high expectations, high growth, and that sort of a positive tone to that can be really important. But again, teens are experiencing so much pressure in so many aspects of their lives, right? Not just at home, but at school. And some of that they take on themselves. Another might be from more external factors. But there's that, we talked about those higher stakes in teenagehood. And they're feeling that big time. It comes up all the time in conversations that I have with students. So even though best of intentions can sometimes be maybe interpreted not the way that we would like them to. To give some more insight into that and what teens are noticing and appreciating and valuing coming from the adults in their lives, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the research work that I do as part of my graduate studies that I do at my workplace. So there's a bit of a blend here. But what we're looking at what students perceive as motivationally supportive. So I'll set a little bit of context here so we know where this is coming from. This is through the CoLab relationship, which is a partnership between Trafalgar School and McGill University Faculty of Education. So we're facilitating ongoing research projects and collaboration opportunities to support education development and sort of bridge that research and practice gap that we hear so much about. What we're looking at, what I study and what I do with Kristy Robinson, is we look at what students are perceiving as motivationally supportive, because that varies from person to person, from day to day, right? We talked about best of intentions sometimes don't land the way we intend. Maybe that's because students are perceiving those things differently than we intend, or maybe perceiving them differently from the person next to them. What might feel really motivationally supportive for one person doesn't feel the same way for the next person. There's a lot of environmental factors that contribute to that. So we're looking really at what are students noticing and perceiving. And we do that in a few different ways. We survey students, we talk to the teachers and get their perspectives of how they are trying to support the motivation of their students. And then we're also looking at what's happening in the classroom that teachers are doing and that students are sort of picking up on and noticing. And like I said, the big focus really here is student perspective. It's not, is the teacher being motivating? Because that's not something that you can really easily identify. And it's not really the part that matters. It matters is it motivating for this person in this context at this time? And if it's not, why not? And what are some things that we could do to help support them and shift in a teaching practice, but also in adult relationships with teens to help them feel more motivated? Like I said, so we're looking at teaching practices that support motivation, so we can give that to our teachers, say, hey, this seems to really connect with the students. This is what they're noticing is supportive, or, this is something that maybe we could try more of and might help them feel more engaged in the task that we're asking them to do. So what I'm going to share with you is some real student voice quotes from the things that what they're saying in their classes, because I think that's really valuable. I mean, we're talking a lot about teens, but I think it's important when we can to include their voice in these conversations because they are the experts of teenagehood right now. Um, one of the things that we're asking students is some of the things that can feel motivating. We talked about task value, the importance of something, or helping them feel like they can be successful in this. And the flip side of that is also the cost that they're experiencing. So that can be emotional costs. That can feel like it's too overwhelming, or I'm too drained to engage in this because I just can't bring myself to get there. And that can be huge, right? That's a real reason not to take something on. Effort, if it feels like they can't keep up with the workload and the demands, then why bother, right? That can be a sentiment for sure. They're being pulled in lots of different directions, especially very engaged teens. I find experience this so much is that they want to be on the sports team and this extracurricular activity and this volunteer, and they want to go be with their friends, and they have so much going on in their lives, as well as school and homework and all of that, that it just pulls them in too many directions that they can't dedicate the time that they would like to for this particular task. And pressure. We've talked about high stakes of high school. They're feeling that too, right? Like if I have to get an A in this because I need to get into this program that I want to get into, that can create a barrier to their engaging with the task if it's too much to take on. And so we ask them, what are the kinds of things that, we ask them on a day, like in a class, what are the cost feelings that they ask them, like, how are you feeling about this sort of thing? And then we looked at what are the teachers doing that help reduce those costs and correlate those two things. So one of the things, so they respond with things like, my teacher shows they care about us. And they would respond with no, sometimes yes, or doesn't apply today. This was one of the most highly correlated items. Students are feeling less cost, emotional pressure, otherwise, when they know that the teachers care about them as people, and that relationship element. So as a quick example, this is what we asked students to also say, when you were responding to this, you said yes or no. What were you thinking of when you were responding to this question? So students said, my teacher showed they care about us by giving us time to ask questions, to understand better, and she's genuinely a very kind and approachable person. And that helps them feel like they can engage in what's being asked of them in that class. So showing that they care about their students was really impactful. A second one was listening to how students would like to do things. So my teacher listened to what we want to do. And they were saying, we can choose certain things we want to work on, and she usually gives us options. And so they have more choice in how they're approaching things that can help them feel more motivated to engage in a task. They have ownership. And finally, providing feedback. So, providing positive feedback, but also feedback on growth. And, what we can do to improve is massive, right? If you feel like there's potential for growth and you're willing to take those risks and how you can improve, then you may be more likely to engage. So these were 3 things that our students highlighted as most correlated with reducing those costs of feeling, too much when you're trying to take on too many things. Okay, so what can we do? And the good thing is, as we mentioned before, there are lots of things that we can do. I'm trying to remember now if I was speaking to this slide or not.
I think it's my turn.
Go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, so those costs, right, they can be really demotivating. Those are sort of the dark side of reasons to do something. They're reasons not to do something, right? So even if we know, for example, well, I really need to study because I really want to get into this program, or I really need to do well on this exam, the costliness of it can weigh against that, usefulness value, to make it really hard to do that. And we, as supporters of teens, educators of teens, parents of teens, people in teens' lives, we ourselves can skill build, and learn the ways that our teen is more and less motivated over time, because that will shift, right? It used to be that you could put on an enthusiastic attitude and get the 5-year-old to do pretty much anything in the world because you were excited about it. Now that excitement might have the opposite effect, right, on the teen. If you're excited about it, they might automatically not be excited about it. You never know. And sometimes they want to be treated like adults and they feel like adults in their minds. They might even look like adults from the outside. But you never know when, again, they are going to feel like a child in their mind, or when they really need support in a way that you might not expect. So I like to consider myself as being in a continual learning laboratory, both with my students and with my own teens, and try to be a really humble learner of them, right? That's my first job. So a very important theory in motivation science that we're going to talk about right now, about how to support anyone else's motivation, and particularly your teens' motivation, comes from a very important theory in motivation science, one that has a lot of strong evidence to support it. It tells us that all humans have basic psychological needs. When their basic psychological needs are met, they're not only happier and healthier, they also have the best chances of being highly motivated and of having high quality reasons or motivations for engaging in the kinds of efforts and strategies that will lead to success in life. And I say success meaning that person's valued goals, right? They do need that motivation to work toward those things, whether it's, getting a personal record in running time, or beating that video game that they really want to beat, or getting that learning that they're really looking to get out of school, or making school fun. So the first psychological need we're going to talk about is relatedness. So there are 3 of these needs. The first one is relatedness. This is the feeling that I am supported and cared for by important others, right? So certainly parents are important others, certainly family members are important others, certainly your teacher and your friends, right, are important others. Relatedness is I like to think of it as sort of the enabler of the other ones, especially in a parent-child relationship. You might try the exact same strategies and they would work or not work based on how your rapport with that teen is, right? If they trust that you care about them and love them and have their best interests at heart, they're willing to forgive a lot of other things and take a lot of sort of cringe on other things, because they know that they trust you, right? That you're in it with them rather than trying to impose something on them. So that's relatedness, and we'll talk about some ways to think about it in a moment. The second really important need is autonomy. Autonomy is a real power need. In fact, some people group all of these needs under really autonomy. People need to feel that they have a sense of choice and ownership. They need to feel like they are the masters of their own destinies, and as you might suspect, that need for autonomy tends to go up, starting in the teen years especially. You definitely saw this when your child went from a baby to a 3-year-old, right? And they wanted everything was, I do it, mine, right? Like autonomy is really important at that stage. And again, in the teen years, it manifests in a different way of like, I can make adult decisions, right? I can handle my school how I want to, and I can start to defy my adults, and I want to do things my own way, basically. So in general, actually, all humans need to feel a sense of choice and ownership. It just starts to look a little bit different with each developmental stage. And it's important that we help teens feel that way, right? And that can look really different for each teen, of course. Now, lastly, we have the need for competence. This is the need to feel capable and able to succeed, right? And also that my abilities and the level of challenge are sort of matched. We're not going to actually feel our need for competence being met if something is too easy, because we're not going to feel like we're mastering challenges. Competence is really that need to feel like we're mastering challenges. So you actually might see a teen looking really unmotivated and disengaged, not because they don't feel like they can do it, but because they feel like, oh, this is too easy, I don't need to be here, or this is not actually engaging me, I can do more than this. So these 3 needs really work together, right? Like I gave that example of how relatedness, being present or not, can really make the difference between an autonomy supportive strategy or a competence supportive strategy being really effective or not, right? I can give my child a choice, and if they trust me and they know that I care about them, that I see them, they might actually feel very supported by that choice. Whereas if I'm otherwise kind of in a distant moment, or we've had a little bit of conflict between the two of us, that choice might not really work, right? To help them feel autonomous or feel motivated by that choice. So as a parent, knowing these three needs can provide you with some tools to reflect on what might be happening in that teen's mind when you perceive that they are seeming unmotivated to you, right? So thinking about relatedness first, you can ask yourself, okay, is it possible that they feel unsupported or disconnected? Do they feel like I care about them? Do they feel like their friends care about them? Do they feel like they have a nice connection, a personal connection with their teacher, or that their teacher is looking out for them? My youngest child this year has a teacher who believes in him and who loves him, who has actually said, I love this kid. And that has made such a huge difference for all of the other things at school. He still faces problems, there's still hard tasks, there's still difficult people to deal with at school, but knowing his teacher just sees him and loves him makes so many things possible for him. And that's really important, especially as parents, right? Our first job is to love our child. I really emphasize this one. So, to troubleshoot that, we can ask ourselves, okay, am I really showing love to this child? Am I really seeing them? Is there a way that I can invest in our relationship first? And think about some of these other things next. For autonomy, if we feel confident that the relatedness need is met, we can think about autonomy. Does this teen feel like they are being controlled, or do they feel like they have no say? Is there a way that I can start to cultivate a sense of choice and remind them of ways they can be masters of their own fates? Or can I maybe unlock my control that I want to have over this situation and let them be a little more adult in the situation? Letting them choose the after school activity, or letting them talk you through what they think their ideal after school schedule would be, for example. As they get older and older, it's really harder to know where to, how much choice versus how much structure to give to your teen. So with my 18-year-old now, I typically don't tell him anything to do. Like, he has expectations, he has responsibilities, but I'm never going to be in a mode to be like, oh, go do your homework, because that is a losing strategy. Instead, if I see him looking like he could use a little support, it's got to be questions, and it's got to be, how's it going? Kinds of questions, rather than like, why aren't you doing your work? Kinds of questions, right? We're going to really try to tone down the control for my 18-year-old. Whereas for the 12 or 15-year-old, I might use a little more structure and say, oh, remember, we always do X at this time. Or, tell me what you're thinking about as your checklist for after school today. Let's get on it together. And let's see, did we do relatedness or competence yet? No. The last one we can, a reflective question for thinking about competence needs that might not be met is, are they feeling overwhelmed, or are they feeling unsure how to proceed, right? We can think through, how can we break this task down into manageable chunks with them? What kinds of questions can we ask to see if it's a confidence issue, or if they're feeling under or over challenged? What are the ways that we can give them advice about how we've managed difficult situations in the past? The other day, I just took one of my teens to the cafe to mix it up, and I said, I'll buy you the drink of your choice and we'll do some work together. And for some reason, that unlocked a feeling of, okay, I can do this. I've got a person next to me who's willing to also do her own hard work next to me, who's investing in their relationship with me, building relatedness. And I also, asked him what strategies he was using, have had him sort of reflect on his competence, and it helped. I saw it help in front of me, and we can think about the ways that was helping him have his basic needs supported. So what does this look like? Next slide here, we're going to talk about what can this look like in practice. We're going to give some pretty simple examples so we can start to reimagine the kinds of habits that we as parents might either have learned from our own parents or just they come out of nowhere sometimes, right? So this is a very common one that we might ask when we see our teen doing something that we did not expect them to be doing. We might be like, oh, did you finish your homework? And that can become kind of a hot button issue kind of question over time, especially if we're asking it pretty often. And the answer is either yes or no, right? They'd be like, yes, or they'll be like, well, no, but, it's hard to figure out a way to get around that. An alternative to that might be more autonomy supportive is, oh, we were going through all the questions first, I see. Why was this late? Or what mark did you get, right? We're going to show our cute little meme here. These are questions that we actually want to know the answer to. And like as parents, it's like good for us to know the answers to these questions. Oh, I saw this was late. Or what mark did you get today on that test that you really cared about? Of course, we want to follow up with the teens. And of course, we want them to feel like they can communicate with us about schooling. But all of these questions, you can imagine how they could come off as controlling, right? Especially if there's a pattern there. So we have some alternatives that we can try instead that will help us get at the same information. Like, what's on your plate this week? Talk me through that. That is a little bit more elevated, like as if you're treating them a little bit more adult-like and you're putting a little bit of onus on them to talk through the tasks, right? We're always hearing from the 6th grade primary teachers, like they're gonna have to learn to develop these skills. They're gonna have to learn how to use their agendas. This is scaffolding for that as a parent, right? What's on your plate this week? And they'll start to tell you, and then you can ask follow-up questions, right? And you can notice how their affect is as well. You can notice how they're talking about it. So I really like this next question here is, what is feeling heavy for you right now? The things that are on your plate this week or today, what feels heavy right now? What feels possible? What do you feel proud of? Right? That can be a really nice way to build that positive emotion between the two of you. And most importantly, how can I support you? I'm definitely not above asking any of my own children, like, here's some things that I'm trying. You've seen me try this to support you. I'm not sure if it's hitting. So, what would be a thing that would feel really supportive of you in doing your schoolwork or setting up a schedule or helping you do what you are telling me you would like to do, but that I don't yet see you doing, for example. Yeah, what kind of support would feel helpful right now is a very valid question, especially as the teens move through closer and closer to adulthood. It's good for us to practice those skills of asking for support and specific kinds of support. I'll turn it over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. So we gave some sort of reframing examples, ways to think about how you approach these kinds of conversations. But we wanted to tackle some more like strategies that you can like try as well and see. And these are things that I do when I work with teens, and it's very simplified on the slide, but easier said than done. So one example is small areas of ownership. And like Kristy was mentioning, this is really striking a balance between providing the structure and the elements that you have control over that create the safe box and boundary that students are working within, and giving them the choices within that to regain some ownership over things that they might feel like they don't have ownership over. And that can include things like when we think around schoolwork, when you're going to study for this thing or where you're going to study. Are you going to work at the dining room table or are you going to work in your room? Maybe how they're going to take breaks or when they're going to take breaks or what strategy they're going to try for their studying. And these are things you can ask, but they're choices that they can make for themselves. When I say striking a balance, it's really important that these choices are authentic and meaningful. So asking them, are you going to use the red highlighter or the blue highlighter to study for history is not really a meaningful choice to them, and they will know that. So that's not going to land the way you think. But each of these things can be very meaningful. Maybe they don't feel comfortable writing or doing work at the dining room table because they feel like there's too much of that surveillance and they want to be able to sort of retreat and have more ownership over their space. And it's a tricky one. It's really tricky because we know that sometimes teens make choices that you wouldn't make for them or for yourself, and not so that's a bad choice but maybe you can see where it's going and they're not quite there yet. And that's the hardest part. So one of the things that I do with teens a lot is I say I'm a data informed person. I'm a research oriented person. That's true. That's factual. It's how I approach a lot of things in my life, but especially how I'm working with students. So if they're going to tell me that they're going to make a choice with something, and especially if it's something that I'm feeling like maybe could go differently, or maybe isn't going how they're going to expect it to go. Like if they're saying that they want to work in their room, I could see how maybe they might be more easily distracted by their device as they're working, and there isn't that sort of oversight to make sure that they're staying on task. I'll let them make this choice, and I'll say, okay, let's set a time frame. 2 weeks usually is my go-to, where you try it your way, and then we're going to collect data at the end of that. And data can include how you're feeling about it, like your opinion, your choice, your voice still matters. That's not going away. But also, is your work getting done? How much sleep are you getting? And those other elements that is going to sort of make that data informed choice to say, did this work for you? Or should we try something else? Now, it's really important when we're talking, especially with that relatedness element, that we do that without judgment. And that's, again, sometimes easier said than done, especially if you see they're making a decision that you wouldn't make. You're not waiting for the I told you so, because then that's not a supported choice. That's not you saying, I see you making this choice for yourself and I support you in that and I care about you and I want you to go forth with that autonomy. It's being the parent who's waiting for the other shoe to drop and then go, see, I was right. I know all the things. Or as an educator, I fall into that trap all the time. It's that feeling of sitting on your hands and letting them figure it out. The other analogy, I have kids, but I have littles. And so it's the analogy of learning to walk. They won't learn to walk if you never let them fall. And it's that same sort of mindset applies to teenagehood as well. They have to be able to make these choices, even if they're not sometimes the best choices, to learn from them. Because then when they come back and say, okay, well, let's do something differently, it didn't work out the way we planned, they still have that ownership and that choice. Say, I did it my way, and now I want to try it this way. And they don't lose that agency based on that. Sorry if you can hear my cat scratching at the door beside me. He's very adamant about getting in this room. It's life, better than the children clawing at the door, I suppose. The other piece is that it takes practice, that we have to give them the opportunity to make these choices for themselves, to have that ownership, because they need the chance to learn from those mistakes as they make them. And again, it's a hard thing to do, to watch them fall sometimes, but I know many students, I have teens in my life as well, where that's the way they're going to learn something. They're going to do it their way. They're going to make that mistake. They might fall down, but they'll pick themselves back up again. And that's the most positive learning experience for them. And again, it can sometimes feel like sitting on your hands to give them that time to practice, but that's so important. And the other piece too, I don't know if I had a bullet for this or not, but there is a dynamic too that's sort of relative to your family and sort of how your comfort choices. So for some people, it might be a reasonable choice that their teen chooses their own bedtime. And that's a choice that you're willing to give them and that fits within the structure and the sort of values of your family, and fantastic, go for it. And for other families, that might not feel like a safe choice that you're giving them, or that sort of, you might not be willing to give up that much control just yet, or depending on the student or the age of your student. And those things are still important. It's not that these choices or these structures are going to be a one size fits all model. They're certainly not. They probably are not even one teen to the next, even within your family. And that's important. So when we talk about that relatedness element, that's where that really comes into play, is knowing your teen and making them feel seen so that you can set the structures where they need to be and also give the choice where it needs to be as well. And like I said, doing that in a warm and supportive manner, not in a sitting back judgmental manner, which can sometimes be a tendency at times. And the last piece of this too, and it's a conversation I have a lot with parents, grandparents, family members, is that the relationship that you have with your child is so important, right? Only you can be their parent. I cannot fill that role as someone who works in academic support. I can't go in and be mom, and I'm not trying to. So that role, and that has to come first, right? You can only do that. They need that person in their life. You have to do that. So if they need a tutor or a manager or someone to help keep them accountable or other areas of their life, and it's causing tension for you to try and also be that person, when I work with students, I say, let me be that person, right? Let me help keep them accountable. Let me help find them the tutor or work with them on something if that's what they need, so that you can prioritize your relationship with them and be parent and be supportive. And like I said, address that most important need, because that can't be at the cost of these other things. And usually, for what it's worth, they're way more willing to do the things with me than with the parent. If I say, let's try it this way, it's usually they're, often open to work with me, whereas sometimes just the same words coming from a parent or a grandparent can be met with a lot more resistance just because of that dynamic in that relationship. So finding those interactions, those opportunities for choice can be huge. And it can be a conversation as well. And it should be with your team to say, I want to find ways to give you more ownership here. What do you think might be helpful for you? What would feel empowering for you? And finding that balance. And it's a tricky one to do.
Yeah, if I can jump in really quickly, Rachel, on that, like
Go for it.
we're talking about as relatedness is like key and a foundation for everything else, right? I think the phrase came to mind as you were speaking there that motivating someone is influencing someone, right? So it's almost like we're using up social capital each time we sort of make an ask and we make a concerted effort to motivate someone. So yes, like don't forget to use your community members, including the excellent community at Traf, to fill different roles, right? I'm going to tell a really brief story and then turn it over for the Q&A, which is just about my niece who is graduating from high school this year. She's been adamant that she wants to be a Broadway star. And that's amazing. She's very, very good, right? The chances of becoming a Broadway star are very small, and the chances of becoming very poor while trying to be a Broadway star are very high. And this has been her parents' concern since she expressed this desire a few years ago. But this is not something she can hear from her parents, and they ultimately decided maybe not something they should hear from her, or from them, rather. So it took a specific lesson with her voice teacher, and her voice teacher said, "This is how much I make per show." And it absolutely changed her perspective, right? So we don't need to use our social capital as parents to solve every single problem. Rachel just illustrated that super well. But remember that relatedness. We do want to motivate them for school. We do want to motivate them to succeed, but we also want to motivate them to keep coming back to us through their whole lives. So use that social capital wisely.
So I mentioned at the top of our seminar here that there's opportunity for questions and collaboration here. I think we all have teens in our lives and we may have similar experiences of things that have been challenging at home or with school or otherwise. And like I said, there's no one size fits all solution to these kinds of things, but I'm hoping that you can walk away from this with some takeaways, let's say. So one being motivation is developing and changing and variable, just like everything else in teenhood, and that's normal and that's good. And we're here to support them with that, but not control that, because as much as we might like to try, we can't. So there's no point in taking that strategy, but really finding ways to support motivation as much as we can. And recognizing that sometimes when teens look disengaged or look like they're unmotivated or not engaging in something that we hope they would be, that it might be something else going on, that it might not be that they just don't care. Rarely, in my experience, is that the case, that the teens don't care. Usually, if they're disengaged, they care an awful lot. It's something else. They don't feel like they can do it, or something feels like too much pressure, or it just doesn't feel like worth their time with so many other things going on. And it's a very easy mistake to look at an eye-rolling teen and think that they don't care about what's going on. Rarely is that the case. It's more usually protection for themselves because those other things are causing a lot of cost on them. So we know some things now, hopefully, that we can do to help them feel more supported, right? So giving them those opportunities for choice and ownership and autonomy that they crave, where it makes sense and where it works for your family, and helping them sort of feel that adulthood that we know that they crave within the structures that we help set for them, recognizing that they're still in a great period of transition. And also that they feel competent to be successful, that they are appropriately challenged with tasks that are set for them both at school, at home, and that it's helping them feel like they really did something. Because that's an addictive feeling too, when you feel like really accomplished and they feel that. And I try as much as I can to point that out to them when I see that they've got that moment, being like, look how good that felt. And then they want to do that again. And again, that element of connection, first and foremost, most important, whether that's with educators or parents, but especially relationships at home with family that are critical for everything else and should come first, even if other things can sometimes feel like they're in the way of that. And ideally, that these small shifts, whether it's an approach to, hey, what's going on today? What do you got on your plate? How can I help you with that? Can help them feel that ownership, and that helps them feel like they can take on what's in front of them, without having to rework every dynamic that we have at home. It shouldn't be big changes all at once. Nothing ever works like that generally. But small changes, small interactions, small reframing. So asking yourselves what might be going on when someone's feeling demotivated, or how can I help them, or what, and just asking them, what can I do to help you? Those kinds of things that can make huge impact and huge difference to support the relationship, but also their individual motivation. Kristy, I don't know if you wanted to add anything for these. These are my, no, okay. These are the takeaways. Take them with you. But like I said, there's time for questions, if you have any, or if there's things that you want clarified from our presentation, experiences that you want to discuss or ask us about, we'd be happy to answer any. If there's any, you can always put them in the chat and we can just talk to them. If you'd like to unmute, you can join us in this unmute land. Go ahead, Susan.
You haven't spoken very much about social media and the influence of that. I know that in my case, I see my granddaughters and most of their friends, but constantly on their iPhones or texting and doing I don't know what. And how is there anything that can be done, or is this just like a phase? I know it's a result of, I think, in my opinion, but you're the experts. I think it grew a lot during COVID, and where socialization there was no gym, no, students had to wear masks. They couldn't go from one class to another. There was no music class. There was no recreation. And that lasted long enough, I think, to put a real dent in social interaction. And I just worry, what is your opinion on that? Is there any way we can help? I know my daughter puts in a time, I think it's an hour and a half of screen time, or I don't know. And then at a certain time, my granddaughters have to give up their iPads and their whatever iPhones and get ready for bed. But there are different techniques, and some. So I'll just be quiet and let you.
Sure. You've touched on a lot, and actually a lot of things that really link well to some of the things we've talked about already. You mentioned COVID as sort of an instigator for this. I 100% agree. I think there was a shift, certainly in teenage experience, but also teenage relationships. We talked a lot about the relatedness, the idea of belonging and feeling that connection and that community. Teens crave that now and then as well. And so there's definitely a draw towards those online connections, because that was what was available to them when other things were not. But that need, that desire for that connectedness was still there. You talked also about setting limits in screen times. That's something that I think more and more parents and grandparents are becoming aware of and knowing about as a way to, like we said, create that boundary and that structure that they work within, right? So if we say you have an hour and a half in the evening to do what you're going to do on your device, I'm not necessarily over your shoulder monitoring you while you're doing that, but this is the time you have to work within. And then the boundary sets in. The last thing I wanted to mention too is the sort of draw of screens. There's obviously that connectedness, but there's that pull. And I think we kind of mentioned that at the beginning, that teens feel pulled in lots of different directions of what their priorities are and their interests. And I think social media tends to lean into those things pretty heavily of, this is what you should be interested in. This is where where you should be engaging or what you should be focusing on. Some for better or for worse at times. But as they're looking and sort of figuring out who they are and their identity, they're certainly influenced by those things around them. One of the things that I'd like to do when I have this conversation a lot with teens is trying, like I said, trying to take a data informed approach. Because as soon as I go in with the attitude of, well, that's such a waste of your time, or, that's not, good for you, or you're not going to do well in this course because you're choosing to do this. There's a judgment and there's a resistance there immediately. So instead, what I try to do is say, okay, listen, let's collect some data here. let's do things your way. You let me know after this 2 week stint, maybe how much you're spending time on your screens. You let me know that as a piece of the data, how much time there is. And it's not a judgment on you of what number you come back with. It's let's collect that piece of information. Let's also collect how you feel having spent that much time. So how is your sleep? How is your emotional state? How are you feeling in terms of your connectedness with your peers, and report that back so we can add that to the piece. And how is schoolwork going? And how are your relationships with your teachers or your family? And sort of collect that data. And then we can try and experiment, right? Then we can say, okay, we have this picture. We've tried it this way. Let's try this and see how we feel, right? And let's recollect that data. So let's say we put a limit on our screens, or we say we're not going to do screens until after we've done our homework. And that may be part of the sort of experiment that we set. But let's set this sort of tone. Again, it's not a my way is going to be so much better attitude. It's let's try this. And you're going to come back and you're going to report all these different areas of your life that you feel might be impacted by this. And we'll compare. 9 times out of 10, that works pretty well for me. And they come back and they're saying, I was sleeping better, or I did feel like less drain or less pull, and they have different ways of sharing that with me. But that tends to work, but it's not me taking the ownership away from them in that dynamic. It's let's try this. You tell me how it goes. You come back. You're still in charge here, obviously within constraints and boundaries that are often set at home, but then we can come back and make choices for yourself. And when they say, well, I felt so much better this way, that gives them that task, that value to the task, right? Of seeing the importance of it, the utility for them. And that will carry them so much farther than me saying this is a good idea. Kristy, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on there, but
No, I
yeah.
mean, that was a really great example of how to implement autonomy supportive like screen regulation, right? Because eventually they're going to age out of your ability to have any say or control over the screen time, right? So we want to help them develop the ability to self-regulate and to have reasoning skills for making different choices with their screens, which is a great way that Rachel just showed that ways you can do that, right? Having a conversation with them and looping them in and trusting their judgment whenever we can. I will also say the research on impacts of screen time is very inconclusive, right? Like there's definitely some sensationalist books and articles out there that make it seem like a done deal, but not all screens are created equal. And I think teens especially really want us as adults to know that some of the ways they're using their screens are incredibly important to them and feel really hard when we take them away. And some of them are building their interests and actually building their reasoning skills or building their social networks in ways that we sometimes can't even imagine because that wasn't an option to us when we were teens. So, doing spaceflight simulator is totally different from doing reels, for example, right? So we can't just assume they're always doing harmful screens for their learning and for their other activities, and it's a continual experiment and adjustment. Whatever opportunities they can have to shape that decision are going to be really good for their longer term regulation. Yeah.
And I think, again, going into that with relationship first is usually successful as well. And just going in with curiosity, tell me what you're doing and what do you show me? That's so cool. I'd love to see more. Like showing that interest and that engagement helps give the parent more insight into what their teens are doing, which is a good thing, but also helps the teen feel seen, to feel open to have those conversations. This is what I'm interested in. These are my passions and my interests, and this is what I think is really cool or interesting and want to share with you. And even if it's around screens, which may not be the favorite thing that your favorite thing that they're spending their time on, that creates that relationship to be able to have those conversations later, right? And sort of say, well, what if we tried this instead? Or what do you think about this? Or, have you considered? But if you go, it's setting relationship first and curiosity often to set the groundwork for those other things, to help build in those opportunities for choice and autonomy as well. But it's a great question. And it's something that comes up all the time, all the time with teens at school, especially, look at academics. It's a hot button issue for sure. A great question. Any other questions or things that people wanted to add on?
There's a question in our chat for you guys.
Thank you, Nadine.
It says, how do you help teens distinguish between the pursuit of excellence / motivation and perfectionism, which might paralyze?
Hmm. Kristy,
I
I
mean,
have
I mean,
personal
my
anecdotes
initial
there, but
reaction to this, my initial reaction to this question is like, is it paralyzing? Then you can kind of tell, right? Like, I am definitely not an expert on this, so I won't speak from like a researcher perspective, but more from a parent or like person perspective, because I tend toward perfectionism myself. I think as soon as it starts to feel impossible, or it starts to feel like I cannot like reach the standard I've set in my own mind, then that might be a clue that we're veering toward perfectionism. But what I would say is try to lean on the experts around you, right? Like that's a great conversation to have with teachers, with learning specialists, with the teen themselves. Like, hey, do you think that you're being perfectionist? Do you think this is in your mind? Are you pushing yourself too hard or setting too high a standard? While of course expressing your belief that they can do it and that they have the skills and capabilities and that you'll help them, talking it through with them. And of course, like always a fan of mental health support and mental health care in the cases where perfectionism can veer toward, hypervigilance and harmful, beliefs and behaviors that we definitely want to keep an eye on. What do you think, Rachel?
this comes up a fair bit too. And I link it back to the idea we talked about earlier of goals, and what the students' goals are, short term, long term, generally. So when there's conversations around perfectionism of I got a 93 on this and I needed a 98 because, and that's sort of the driving narrative, or what can feel like completely deflating if they don't meet that goal that they've set. I try to unpack it a little bit to say, okay, so, why is that your goal? Why is that important to you? Because there's always a reason. Because then it can help sort of address what underlying might be going on. If there's like, well, my friend got this and I need to make sure that I'm meeting that thing, and helping sort of understand the perspective they're taking when they set these potentially unrealistic goals for themselves. And then I also try and frame that more long term. So, tell me what you want to do next year or after high school. For senior students, we have that conversation a fair bit of like, what are your intentions going forward? And how is this helping you get there? Right. So it's, if this 93 on your math test is feeling like impeding your goals of going into that degree, well, is it really like, let's zoom out a second here. Like what happens? Did it really prevent you from moving forward here? Would it matter if you got a 95 versus a 93? Sometimes we'll look at it. I'll do math with them and say, let's look at the year. This test mark that you got is worth 0.5% of your year's mark. Does that feel as impactful as it does to you right now? And not to take it away from their feelings, that you have to give the space and the time for that. Feel your feels. Like we're not wiping that aside. But once we've done that, let's zoom out again and see, is this going to matter tomorrow? Is this going to matter a week from now? I tell them, I'm like, if you asked me what my grade 10 French mark was, I don't think I could tell you. If you paid me a lot of money, I don't think I could do it, because that doesn't have the same impact to me as an adult. But I remember as a teen, it felt huge. And the feeling I remember, but I don't remember what the number was. And sometimes helping to sort of give that perspective can help to reframe the conversation. But it does also link to their goals. And I try to keep that element too of, I'm not saying that can't be your goal. I'm not saying that you can't go on and want to do these things and this is important for that. But let's try to take a critical lens with it and see what would happen if, or what might the situation have been. And usually that helps us sort of reframe the narrative a little bit. The other example I give, because I'm still a student also, I get grades on my transcripts. So I'm not so far removed from it. But I'll tell them, McGill's, the idea of good enough, let's say. So universities sometimes have a threshold mark where above a certain percentage is listed as an A or a 4.0, but there isn't discernment between, an 85 or a 90 necessarily. So for me, when I'm approaching something, I have to think about my time commitments elsewhere, the energy I have to give to the task, and what does good enough look like for this? Does it have to be perfect? What is the impact if it is or isn't? And once I can set that for myself, the idea of good enough, that becomes the benchmark of, have I achieved that or not? And not, is it 100? Because that that doesn't need to be what good enough is. It could be a 90 or an 85 or whatever the number is I associate with good enough. Sometimes that's a 60. I just need to pass. And that's okay too. Goals look different for different people. There's no set number that we're all trying to go for here. But once I set the good enough goal, then I know what I'm striving for, and I can help sort of avoid those tendencies of it has to be perfect. It doesn't. It has to be good enough for what I decide.
Yeah, and I feel like they will respond to the tone that adults set, right? Like if you're talking them through that scenario in such a cool tone, and it's like, oh, fine, that really helps.
That'd be really
that,
cool.
I think that's really similar how they respond to parents as well. If they're like, oh, you got a 60, or like, oh no, what if you don't study? Like that anxious energy can be so infectious. So as someone with a quite perfectionistic oldest son, I sometimes feel like the best thing that can happen to them is for them to experience a rather large failure during high school when it actually doesn't have that high of stakes, and for them to experience it and see adults around them reflect, oh, yep, you didn't get what you wanted to get. What'd we learn?
Life happens.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the world doesn't end, like it just won't end. And that can be such a positive experience when they're in that exact phase. Exactly. Yeah. It can happen in university too.
Oh, it does. It does. It reminds me of, again, I have little, so sometimes I'm in the little kid land. But like when your kid falls down and they hurt themselves, and sometimes you just have to sit and not react because if you go,
Exactly.
oh no, are you okay? Then the tears come and it becomes a much bigger thing. But if you can kind of restrain a little bit and say, yeah, okay, let's keep going, then maybe they can follow your energy there. There's something else I was going to add. Oh, the point of comparison. It comes up a lot and can be very demotivating for people when they're comparing whether their marks to their friend or anything about themselves. It can be, there's so much that goes into identity, and they tend to make those comparisons with the people around them as they're trying to figure out how they fit into everything. And I have this conversation a lot where, they're saying, well, this person didn't study, they didn't do all these things, and they got a better mark than I did. And I worked so hard and I did all these things. And that might very well be true. And I can't say, well, maybe they just got lucky. Maybe they didn't have to try as hard. And that can be part of the reality. I can't lie to them and say, no, I'm sure they worked hard and just, kept it secret. But I always say that the ability to overcome challenges, to work hard, to find strategies, to seek support, that is a skill set. That is an arsenal of tools that you will have for life. And those things matter so, so, so much more, because what often happens for the kid who might be breezing through, I was that kid, they will hit their wall, I promise you. And it might be in university. And it is so much harder when it's later, because you suddenly realize that you're lacking all those tools that you need to overcome challenges. Whereas some people feel that in grade 2 when they're learning how to read, and suddenly that's the biggest challenge for them. But they build all these skills that they then rely on later in life, and we still do as adults. So I try to, again, zoom out a little bit to say, just because someone's path is a little different than yours and their experience is different than yours right now, this is how much you're gaining from your experience that you're going to keep with you. And you've hit that now, and you have that now, and that's so valuable. So it's a lot of reframing. But again, it's trying to make that a personal experience for them, help them feel seen, help them feel that there's the relationship, but also that they are in control of how they move forward in these things.
It's true. I know highly accomplished professors, PhDs, failed classes in high school, in college, in university, and I myself didn't learn how to actually study until I got to my PhD. So, all those experiences are great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's harder later.
It really is. Yeah, I don't recommend it.
No, teenagehood is a great time for this, because it's the time to fall on your face and make the mistakes and learn all these things with the adults around to support you, to help you through and pick up those pieces. It's harder as an adult when you have to spend for yourself a little bit more. So trying to sort of help them see that too, that this is the time for these things, to set those boundaries for yourself, to make those good choices or make the bad choices and learn from those too. That's part of it.
Yep. And remember to take care of yourselves too. I know how it can be an emotional thing to parent a teen. It can be a whole new landscape, and so remember to pour back into yourself as well, because the more nurtured you are, the more psychologically healthy you are, the better you'll be able to pour that autonomy, competence, and relatedness support into your teens who need that so much.
Well, we don't have any more questions. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. It was such a important and insightful conversation that I feel like has just begun. And I'm sure you're going to carry this into your conversations at home. And I know I am. And I want to thank you both, Rachael and Kristy, for hosting us tonight, for
Absolutely.
taking the time to speak to us about this. It was wonderful.
Yes.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, it was a great time. Thank you.